Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a really foundational question. How did geography and early regional economies fuel political conflicts that literally shook the earth in the early United States? We're going to act as data detectives today to uncover some historical truths. Okay, let's dive into this.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with snapshots of a nation, then move through the industrial North, the export-driven South, and the developing West. From there, we'll see how economics drive politics and wrap things up by talking about unity, morality, and education.
All right, Section 1, Snapshots of a Nation, Reading the Big Picture.
I want you to think of economic charts not as boring math, but as vivid snapshots. Every single number and percentage is a vital clue about how real people lived, worked, and fought for what they believed in. Which brings us to sectionalism. This is what happens when different regions of a country develop totally distinct economies, leading directly to conflicting views on national policies, things like trade, slavery, and government power. It's the undeniable root cause of why the early republic divided.
Let's move to and see how this builds with Section 2, the industrial North, the power of manufacturing.
Back in the earlier republic, a staggering 90% of all manufactured goods were produced in the North. That leaves just 10% for the entire rest of the nation. That is absolute, unquestionable dominance in American manufacturing.
So put your detective hats on for a second. If a single region produces 90% of the country's manufactured goods, what does that actually tell you? What kind of political climate does an economy like that demand?
Well, because they built basically everything in factories, the North depended heavily on industry. And because of that, they strongly supported policies like protective tariffs. Tariffs are simply taxes on foreign goods. They made imported items much more expensive, which protected northern factory businesses and encouraged Americans to buy domestic.
Moving right along to Section 3, the export-driven South.
The Cotton Kingdom. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the immense economic reality it represents. The Southern economy was just a completely different world. Instead of consuming what they produced locally, they had this intense, almost total dependence on exporting goods. They weren't building things in mills, they were growing massive amounts of cotton, which fueled the global textile industry, and shipping it across the ocean.
Let's think about the flip side of that economic coin. If your entire livelihood relies on exporting crops and buying manufactured goods from the outside, what kind of national policy are you going to vehemently oppose? High tariffs, for sure. The South despised high tariffs because they made foreign trade incredibly expensive. Every time they sold cotton overseas, they had to pay a massive penalty just to buy back basic supplies they couldn't make themselves. This created a direct, unavoidable political collision with the pro-tariff North.
Which brings us to Section 4, the developing West, the nation's breadbasket.
Here is the final piece of our geographic puzzle. The newly developing western frontier was the absolute center for growing the nation's food crops. They weren't weaving cloth and they weren't exporting cotton. They were harvesting the wheat and corn that the rest of a rapidly growing America desperately needed to eat. But there's a huge logistical catch here. If you were a farmer on the western frontier growing mountains of food, what national policies might you support? Think about it. How do you get all those heavy crops to buyers sitting hundreds of miles away in eastern cities?
You need infrastructure. Because they required shipping goods to distant markets, the West strongly supported internal improvements. They demanded heavy government spending for things like new roads, bridges, and massive canal systems like the Erie Canal to connect their isolated farms right to those hungry eastern markets.
All right, Section 5, Economics Drive Politics. Tracing the divide.
And this brilliantly illustrates our historical findings in one clear view. Why is it vital to understand the whole nation's economy to get its political divisions? Well, look how it fits together like a giant puzzle. The North's industry demanded protective tariffs. The South's export agriculture demanded low tariffs. The West's food crops required internal improvements like roads and canals. You simply cannot understand the voting patterns without first understanding how people put food on the table. Finally, Section 6, Unity, Morality, and Education, the Spiritual Mindset. Historical sectionalism really serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when we let our differences divide us. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us, 2 are better than 1. If either of them falls, one can help the other up.
Just imagine if the North, South, and West had used their unique economic strengths to lift each other up, rather than constantly fighting over national policies.
It highlights the very real danger of division. Ephesians chapter 4 challenges us to make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. This isn't just ancient history, guys. It's a call for us today to truly listen, to understand, and to actively work towards solutions that benefit everyone in our communities, not just our own side.
And honestly, this history perfectly highlights the philosophy behind the HeroesMart Academy. Education without morality ultimately leads to selfish choices that tear communities apart. I mean, what is the point of being highly educated if it only leads to division and harm? True success requires a spiritual mindset that purposefully intertwines education with biblical morality.
So the crucial point is exactly what Romans chapter 8 promises. There is true peace of mind for everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. When we engage with our education through a lens of faith, prioritizing unity over selfish division, it brings a lasting peace to both ourselves and our nation.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I want you to look back at the history of our country and then look at your own community. How will you use your education, combined with your moral compass, to build unity instead of division today? Challenge yourself to apply this right now. Be a unifier. Thanks so much for exploring with me, and keep learning.